the forest will be gone. We will lose the gibbon, we will lose the forest, we will lose the carbon sequestration. We don't get to kick the can for a year or 2 years or 5 years on REDD. It's one of the best ways we know to bring funding to the people who are in the forest and around the forest to help incentivize them to not cut it down.
I'm Ian Welsh from Innovation Forum. When I was in Cambodia recently, I spoke with Charles Bedford, Chief Impact Officer at Carbon Growth Partners, about the price of carbon and how it's likely to change over the coming years. And we also discussed the characteristics of a good carbon project. We were talking in Phnom Penh. Tell me, what does Carbon Growth Partners do?
So we basically go around the world and look for the highest integrity carbon projects and figure out how to finance them, get financing to stand these projects up and make them work for carbon capture. And we are investment managers in the sense of we've gone out and found investors who are really interested in both making a bottom line return on their investment, but also contributing to the climate crisis.
So essentially you're investing in long carbon.
We're getting long carbon, exactly. So if you're an investor, you feel like carbon as an investment asset class, which is a very new asset class, is something you want to get into, that's what we do.
So carbon prices have kind of been all over the place the last few years. How do you think that carbon prices will change in the coming years?
Well, I mean, the whole theory of carbon markets is to make sure that price of carbon gets embedded in the bottom line of all of the work that corporates do, all of the stuff that all of us do, all the purchases, all of the travel, everything, manufacturing. And the notion is that if you drive carbon and take that carbon price as an out of the externality zone and put it into the embedded in the cost of doing business zone, that will drive lots of changes in the way we do business, right? So you'll start to take actions that will decarbonize your business if you know that carbon prices are going to be going up.
Do you have any sense when carbon pricing will become more realistic?
Well, today we have carbon pricing that runs the gamut. In the compliance market, it's in the euro $100 a ton zone for Europe, and that's actually just up from 20 euros a ton only a few years ago. On the other end of the spectrum, in the voluntary market, at the lowest end of sort of CDM era, UN CDM era credits, you're finding credits for less than $1. It's the same ton of carbon that's being reduced in the European compliance context that is being reduced in an Indian wind project, for example. So the price differential actually doesn't make a lot of sense. We expect to see a couple of things happen. All prices are going to be going up, including compliance markets. Compliance markets are designed to rise over time. Essentially, the idea in a compliance market is you get a cap and you're trading around under your cap, and then the cap gets dropped every year, and so the price is going to go up. So we know carbon in the compliance markets is going to go up. We expect also that the voluntary carbon market prices will go up as well because they are the same ton of carbon being sequestered. The demand for voluntary carbon is skyrocketing. So 5,000 companies have registered their pledges with the Science Based Target Initiative, another multi-thousand with the Climate Disclosure Project, and they're basically saying we're going to be carbon neutral by a date certain. And that means a lot of work, hard work to decarbonize and then to offset or compensate for the rest of their emissions. So that demand curve is huge. That's one reason. The other reason is we think that regulators around the world, and we're seeing it already in places like Singapore, South Africa, Colombia, are going to let voluntary carbon projects into their compliance market. So you'll see a convergence of the two markets in addition. So you see overall price rise through regulatory adjustments in the compliance market, and then you'll also see price rise because of convergence, and then price rise because of the increasing commitment by the corporate sector.
Okay, let's think about carbon projects now. What do you look for as an investor in carbon projects for reassurance as to terms of credibility?
Well, look, the great thing about the voluntary carbon market is that it's already got lots of belt and suspenders in place to make sure that carbon projects are, up to snuff. So they go through an initial verification or initial registration process and are deemed sufficient to even proceed. So right out of the gate, you've got the registry saying and the standard saying this is something that we would approve if you go out and do it right. And then even before they go out and do it right, they have to go get an auditor. So the auditor comes in and says, yep, they're complying with this methodology under the certification standard. And then they go out and do the work. and then they have to go back out again to get an external auditor, a VVB, verification or validation body, to ensure that they've actually done the work that they said they were going to do, and then go back to the certification standard, and the certification standard has another look at it. So this is really a process that's already got baked into it a number of safeguards. There are also other options that we use to do to ensure that the projects we're buying and credits and financing are high quality. So we use all of the rating agencies, for example. Rating agencies are independent entities looking at projects from a variety of different perspectives. We use all of them because we think that it's good for us to know all of what they have to say. They're all brand new because it's a brand new market, but they're getting really good at looking at projects. And then finally, we go out and look at the projects on the ground. So we have staff in Pakistan, in Africa, in Latin America, Mexico, and Colombia. And when we do big, larger investments, we make sure that somebody's out there looking to make sure that that stuff's actually happening on the ground. But what we look for in the projects themselves to make sure that they are sort of internally able to sustain themselves over time and drive the kind of carbon reductions that they say they're going to do that. And what that mostly means to us, the science has to be right, of course, but what really that means is that all of the people who live around and in the project, if it's a REDD project or reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation project, that they have to be vested in it. They have to be sharing in the benefits. They have to be the owners of the project, de facto or de jure owners of the actual project, in order for you to think about long-term success. Those are the sort of things that we go through.
Okay. You mentioned REDD just now. You're a big investor in REDD Plus projects. Why for you does REDD Plus work?
Well, look, I mean, the fact is that the forests of the world are a massive carbon sink that we desperately have to figure out a way to conserve them, right? There's just no other way that has worked so far to stop deforestation. REDD offers that opportunity for the world. There has been plenty of promises made over the years for other methodologies, zoning and declaration of parks that turn out to be just on paper alone. REDD's the first real mechanism where you see a consistent results-based payments traveling, going from countries and companies in the global north to the global south to preserve those forests. So that is the critical factor. And this is scientists estimate between 25 and 30% of the climate change solutions are about conserving the forests that we have. And this is the only thing that's really worked.
Why then do you think that REDD Plus has attracted such recent criticism?
Well, look, there's a great American humorist, Yogi Berra, who said it's tough to make predictions, especially when they're about the future. What happens in every carbon project is the developer goes out and and says, look, I got to make a set of predictions about what's going to happen in the future. And I have to then try to beat those predictions, whether it's Indian installed wind into an Indian grid, or if it's a avoided deforestation project in Colombia. The thing about predictions is they're always wrong. It's a question of how wrong. And so that's why REDD has, and other carbon project types have also run into this criticism, is because they're always going to be a little bit wrong. And so the question is, how much wrong can we tolerate? And how much are we going to get picky about whether somebody was off by a little bit in terms of how many credits they received? What's driven most of this criticism is not the methodology, not the process of creating credits itself. What's driven most of the criticism, I think, is the fact that a lot of people don't like the idea of an environmental market, don't even like the idea of corporates being able to say, hey, look, we contributed to this country's or this indigenous people's efforts to decarbonize. They don't like that because they feel like it's greenwashing. My perspective is I'm fine with it. I'm happy to have greenwashing. Greenwashing is great in my mind. So as long as the payments are happening and as long as the price of carbon is rising over time, because that's the critical issue. It's not about the claim, it's about the price.
And it's about the impact on the ground, surely.
And the impact on the ground, sure. I mean, there are those who would say that we should pay people to dig holes and fill them back up again, and have that embedded into the price of carbon in Shell or BP. I don't think that's right, and it's not necessary, right? We already have this mechanism, 200 separate very complicated, science peer-reviewed methodologies, ways to create a carbon credit. REDD is one of them. Actually, it's actually 5 of them or 6 of them, but it's one of the best ways we know to bring funding to the people who are in the forest and around the forest to help incentivize them to not cut it down.
Do you think that it boils down to prejudice against a market-based solution?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a powerful anti-corporate kind of bias, especially amongst my friends in the environmental community. They just can't get over the fact that the corporate sector should be doing things voluntarily. They don't quite get it, and so there's a powerful bias on that front. There's a notion, I think, that corporates should be regulated and that countries should be preserving their forests for free. I think that's kind of crazy, right? I mean, if you've been to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, you know that zoning the forest in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is probably not going to work, not even just this decade, but probably not this century, right? It's a long way to go, and there needs to be a lot of development to ensure that the people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo aren't so desperately poor that they have to go into the forest and cut down the trees.
Let's talk a bit more about the characteristics then of a good project. What should people listening to this, people watching this, what should they be looking for when they're looking for a good carbon project?
So great carbon projects come from the bottom up. The project developers are out there working with local people in places which are under severe threat from deforestation, for example. So here in Cambodia, for example, we've visited a couple of REDD projects, the Keosima project and the Southern Cardamoms project. It's shocking how close to the ground and engaged with the communities around these places the two proponents of the project are, WCS and Wildlife Alliance, the Wildlife Conservation Society and Wildlife Alliance. And they're working so closely with local communities, but they're also working at the national level to ensure that the government is excited and interested and engaged and doesn't over-issue leases across the top of these REDD projects. At the international level, to make sure that people know that the human development aspect of a REDD project is one of the core aspects that will make it successful. So for us, looking at projects like in the REDD sector, places where the government has its act together and really understands REDD and understands how to support it and agrees to abide by it and is part of the solution of law enforcement and human development and bringing the sorts of services to indigenous people that haven't had them before. And then the engagement and ownership, really, like true ownership by the communities in a REDD project. Those are the 2 or 3 factors that we really care most about.
So as you say, we've been in Cambodia this week seeing REDD projects on the ground. What have been your other impressions or inspirations from what you've seen?
It's hard not to be just blown away by the nature and the sort of the forests themselves. What the biodiversity in the forest, whether it's the flora, flowers and trees and bushes and the variety of the variety of that's in there. Just this dense matrix of hundreds and hundreds of species, or the fauna. Unbelievable. There's 2,500 gibbons of this type that live in Keosima. You know the full name.
It's the southern yellow-cheeked crested gibbon.
The southern yellow-cheeked crested gibbon. I know, it's a very long, complicated. There's only 2,500 left in the world. A few populations in Vietnam, maybe another very small population here in Cambodia, and then 2,200 of them live in the Keosima REDD project. We watch them sing to each other in their family groups, and they're living, basically cheek to jowl with the Bunong indigenous people, as they have for millennia. And so making and enabling, a situation where the Bunong can continue to make a living and progress and get educated in healthcare, and also see the perpetuation of a very endangered species is a absolute, once in a lifetime opportunity.
You made a good point yesterday when we were talking. How have we allowed there to be only 2,500 of these gibbons left?
Yeah. It blows you away. I mean, these are primates. These are on the same branch of the evolutionary tree that you and I are, right? And give them another 5 million years, they'll have microcomputers and cell phones. Their lifestyles are very similar to ours. Their duration, their family groups, the way they interact. Shocking that we have let this happen, and really for very little gain, right? I mean, the economic gain from extirpation of gibbons from the planet is minuscule. It's a few $billion that somebody's is gonna go into somebody's pocket in a in a sawmill in Cambodia or Vietnam. A couple of $billion, we're going to trade that for this incredible primate, the gibbon. Seems like an insanity to me.
Let's think to the future then. What for you are the key steps you want to see in the next few years that will reduce deforestation and its associated climate impacts?
Well, look, I mean, we have to do, as Antonio Gutierrez said, everything everywhere all at once on the forest. And so in our view, that means, in places like, the developed world, the governments do need to zone and to prevent deforestation. So in the north of, the Russian, Canadian, American kind of boreal forest, that sort of management of that forest has to get a lot smarter. Now, the big factors for two reasons. One is because of the carbon storage, and two is because of the lack of governance in the tropics. That's really going to be the big focus for us. And so we have to make the most progress there. And mostly what that means is figuring out how to financially incentivize governments, indigenous people, corporates, local communities in those places to keep the forests standing as opposed to letting them get cut down. And that's a purely economic problem, absolutely just an economic equation for people in the DRC, in Cambodia, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Brazil. And I think it's actually pretty simple, right? REDD offers a terrific mechanism to do that. Very few others have made any dent in this problem. Arguably, the graph of when we started talking about the planet and the number of words spent on on COPs since the '92 Earthquake Summit, and the number of pleas for urgency, it exactly tracks the rising rate of deforestation over the last 30 years as well. That's a very discouraging problem. So I think REDD offers one of the great solutions. There are others out there. But this is one that we have a chance to make happen now. And now is when is important. We don't get to kick the can for a year or 2 years or 5 years on REDD. That means that the forests that we spent the week here in Cambodia will be gone. We will lose the gibbon, we will lose the forest, we will lose the carbon sequestration that it provides us.
Well, we saw clear examples of how forest disappears very rapidly. We flew over it. We saw it with our own eyes. And you're right, I think the incentive structure here in Cambodia is a really interesting one. It involves the government, but not directly. But the government is involved in supporting rather than leading from the front. So it's a very interesting incentive structure here that perhaps can work. Charles Bedford, Carbon Growth Partners, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you, Ian.